Hi, my name is George Fasching, helping you unlock your team's genius. In this video, I would like to offer a video response to something I've come across. This has been put together by Atlassian. You might know them. They are the maker of Jira, a very widely adopted delivery management software that many teams use out there. And Atlassian very kindly has put some time and energy in here. Megan and the production team have shared how it is that they are doing it. So I am very grateful for them offering this information to us, because whenever organizations are on their particular journey, it's always good to learn from them and see what they're doing to potentially inspire attempts that we might to consider for our own work. My perspective on this is I've been working with Agile teams for the last almost 10 years in many different contexts, well over a dozen or 2 dozen different contexts and different constellations, quite a few organizations in there as well. So I will watch the video together with you, pause every once in a while and provide some commentary. So let's see what Megan and Atlassian have to share about backlog grooming. So firstly, backlog grooming, didn't take very long to make the first pause, is a term that we've actually moved away from. It is still widely used out there, so nothing fundamentally wrong with it. It's just that in the UK, the term grooming has a very different meaning. So if you're curious, feel free to Google that. Just be careful when you do. So overall, we've gone from backlog grooming over to backlog refinement. So just a little side note. All right, let's see what we've got here.
At Atlassian, we've developed a 3-step sprint planning process that has worked really well for our teams. The first step is backlog grooming meeting. The second step is the actual planning session. And the third step is creating your first few action items.
So what I like is that there continuity is shown here between the backlog refinement activity, as it is referred to in Scrum, the sprint planning meeting, and creation of the action items. If you think back to core Scrum, there is a little bit of clarification that I'd like to offer here. So backlog refinement is an activity that teams do. Usually up to 10% of their time are spent in backlog refinement. Then the sprint planning meeting happens, the sprint planning session actually includes sprint planning part 2, where the team is encouraged to think about their delivery approach, at least to help them get off to a good start. So the end of the overall sprint planning session is actually already dedicated to working out what the first steps are, what the first action items are. But this relationship between these three aspects is very important, and the fact that backlog refinement is happening is really a good thing and helps to make sprint planning a lot easier.
Let's take a deeper dive into each of these steps and talk about the details. Hi, Megan Cook here, Group Prog Manager for Jira Software at Atlassian, the makers of Jira and other collaboration tools. So in our last episode, we talked about what sprint planning is and how it helps focus execution, minimize surprises, and guarantee overall higher quality code. Now let's take a closer look at how to do it. The first step, the backlog grooming meeting, is something that many developers will cringe at because it involves holding a meeting before the meeting.
Okay, so they are 2 separate sessions usually, and the sprint planning meeting is one where the whole team gets together in order to work out what the purpose is of the next sprint and how they're going to go about it. So it is true that backlog refinement is in preparation to have a smooth sprint planning meeting, but it is not a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. It is actually a rather important activity that the whole team is doing together. Now, I have also encountered some developers who, to use Megan's word, cringe at hearing that that backlog refinement is about to happen. Usually when we've worked a little bit further, we determined that the way that the meeting was done may not have been as very effective or enjoyable, and perhaps also the impact of having the meeting or various qualities of having the meeting on sprint planning was not so obvious. So there we go.
But good news, developers may be excused from it, and there's
so I would strongly discourage the product development team to be excused from from backlog refinement. Backlog refinement is quite essential in developing a whole team understanding of the product. If the development team members are excused from backlog refinement, then we're actually risking a lot of issues in the future. So first of all, the impact is that the team does not actually anticipate what is coming down the line. There is not a lot of consultation, not a lot of creativity going around, not a lot of actual cognitive product development that is happening in preparation for the sprint planning meeting. And also, if the product owner is the only person who truly has the full insight of the product, then we are at very high risk, because if the product owner is unavailable or something, God forbid, was to happen to the product owner, then we're losing all of that knowledge, and it has a severe impact also on product resilience and business resilience. So I would strongly discourage the development team being excused from the refinement session, but rather look to improve the refinement session so that it is a productive and enjoyable session for everybody.
There's actually a purpose behind this approach: to save time during the actual sprint planning session and make that meeting more productive. You see,
so whenever teams have experimented with that approach from my little bubble that I've been working in, actually people, the development team not participating in backlog refinement caused a very inefficient sprint planning meeting where a lot of questions then had to be answered, and the sprint planning meeting actually turned into its own little refinement session, because the whole team, the development team, needed to understand and appreciate what the product owner had in mind with each item in the product backlog.
See, sprint planning involves two key tasks: grooming the backlog and deciding which work to complete in the upcoming sprint.
Unfortunately, real sprint planning, there is no place for backlog refinement. We want to enter sprint planning with an already ready and refined sprint backlog. The main reason for detaching the two activities, or rather backlog refinement as an activity from sprint planning, is that we have an opportunity to respond to change. So for instance, the team gets together, and by team I mean product owner and development team, gets together for backlog refinement and are 1 or 2 working days away from the start of the next sprint, designated by the sprint planning meeting. And the product owner needs to get additional input from outside. Then the time difference between the last backlog refinement get-together and sprint planning allows them to do that. Whereas if we only have the backlog refinement at the beginning of a sprint planning session, then we don't have that opportunity. So we really want to get the product backlog into a ready state so that it can be used in sprint planning. So prioritization is also too late to happen in the sprint planning meeting. The product backlog really should be prioritized beforehand. And the only thing that we need to start with is for the product owner to have an overarching goal in mind for the specific sprint. So let's see what else is on the agenda at Atlassian for sprint planning.
At Atlassian, we found that the backlog grooming is best done beforehand in a separate meeting with the product owner and Scrum Master.
Yes, best done beforehand, that is absolutely correct. However, not just with those two, but really the product development team should be in there as well.
We make this pre-meeting optional for the full development team. Regardless of whether they attend, you'll need at least 30 minutes to triage the issues you're most likely to take on in the next.
I really like that it's optional. However, I believe that when it's optional and there is no work being done on making this an effective meeting, that most development team members who have not experienced the value of a good product refinement session are probably using that option and they're not participating in that meeting. And 30 minutes for a good refinement session, doubt it. You can only achieve that because we're excluding the team, but then more often than not we're paying for that drive for efficiency, because the development team is then trying to play catch up at the first time they're actually seeing the backlog, which in this case would be at the beginning of sprint planning.
Next 2 sprints. Sometimes you'll find items that don't have enough detail to be executed or need more information from the product owner. And that's the beauty of grooming the backlog in advance. Those gaps can be filled in between meetings so that there aren't any blockers or time wasters during the actual sprint planning meeting.
Yes, that is the purpose of backlog refinement. And again, if the whole team is involved in backlog refinement, then we are avoiding these things. And for the team to have a definition of ready, that ensures that all the items that end up in sprint planning are actually ready and ready to be used, so that we don't end up with a so-called sprint planning meeting that is actually a backlog refinement session.
Check out the next video to learn all the ins and outs of a successful sprint planning meeting.
Okay, so some useful bits in here. However, I feel with the approach that we've seen here, is not the only organization that does it this way. I have seen this in the past as well. But usually when there is a sort of pro forma backlog refinement where the product owner gets together with the Scrum Master, then maybe the product owner gets some feedback from the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master can ask some Socratic question to help the product owner improve it. But usually that results in the development team being called at a disadvantage as soon as they do see the product backlog, and it's likely that that only happens at the beginning of sprint planning. So then the refinement happens there actually, because the development team is playing catch up. So once again, thank you very much to Atlassian for sharing the way that they're doing it. I have seen teams do it this way. Usually the results of doing it this way is that we further the stereotype that product development teams dislike product backlog refinement, and we end up with a diluted sprint planning meeting that is not actually focused on the purpose of sprint planning, which is agreeing the goal for the upcoming sprint, a micro vision, if you will, for the development team to pull items from the top of the backlog that are ready, that help the team to realize the goal of the sprint, which of course is no surprise to the team because that has been collaboratively explored beforehand with the product owner in, guess what, product backlog refinement meetings, and then sprint planning part 2, where the team works out the delivery approach that they want to do in order to achieve the sprint, certainly to help them get off to a good start. So product backlog refinement is an activity really taking up to about 10% of the overall team's time, has huge benefits for doing it. The whole team really actually feels more ownership for the whole product. The whole team shares a whole product understanding and is really involved in the product creation process, rather than ending up as a, if you will, delivery factory for the product owner, where we're not really using the full creativity of the team. Yeah, this is a way of doing it. I have seen it in the past. The teams that have tried it have seen a lot of issues with it. So yeah, let me know what approach to backlog refinement you're doing and how you're practicing your sprint planning meetings. And yeah, all the best for now, and all the best for the practice with your team. Thank you very much, and goodbye.